Thanks very much for the introduction, Helen. I'm going to get swiftly on to one of these examples from the Northeast Queensland Mineral Deposit Atlas. Paul's going to give an introduction to the kind of the border series a little bit later on, but just broadly to introduce tungsten as a really quite significant new economy mineral or metal. Obviously, we know that it's used in a range of industrial applications, from high-tech applications to hardened steels, and increasingly in more kind of specific applications, including photothermal applications. One of the reasons it's obviously designated as strategic is just because of the supply. It's kind of currently driven still by China, and the 80% of the world's supply of tungsten is driven from production in that country. So the USA, Japan, EU and Australia have all ranked this as a critical metal. So this is a great opportunity to talk about a Queensland-based tungsten deposit that's seen a resurgence in life, partly due to reprocessing and also due just to the fundamental fantastic geology in the area and amenability to this deposit style, particularly to new processing capabilities as well. So I'm going to talk very briefly about that as well. Just not obviously to steal Paul's thunder, just to give kind of a context. This work was completed as part of the Northeast Queensland Mineral Deposit Atlas. These are all available online, so I do encourage you to download these and the 3D dataset as well. And it's a collaborative effort, obviously, from the BRC, so all these people involved in here. So thanks everyone for your contributions as well. Just a quick overview of the talk I'm going to give today. I'm just going to talk very briefly about the discovery and the early processing history of this deposit. It has a very protracted history, like lots of mines in Queensland discovered in the 1800s, and has kind of had a sporadic processing and mining history. Drawing off the Atlas volume, I'm going to talk kind of briefly about the regional deposit geology, discuss the mineralisation and genetic model, just touch very briefly on the geoscience analyst package, and then open up to some questions as well. This is just a photo on the right-hand side. Is just a recent photo from the historical open pit. This was renamed this year in honour of Andy White. He was a Queensland-based geologist that sadly passed away earlier in the year. He was a former director of the BRC, so the current owners at Mount Carbine, in honour of his work there, renamed it. So just in terms of the discovery and processing history, Mount Carbine, it's located about 80 kilometres away from Cairns. You can see it's located in this cluster of tungsten deposits, including Wolfram Camp and Watershed, which Paul's going to talk about a little bit later on. So it was discovered in 1883. There was outcropping quartz veins and also wolframite ridge scree that was found on the side of Carbine Hill. So that was obviously amenable to early prospecting and extraction methods. It was mainly driven by demand during World War I, particularly for armament and weaponry. So at the end of World War I, obviously the demand ceased and the tungsten price collapsed. So after producing about 3,000 tonnes of wolframite concentrate, the mine was brought to a close. There was a second stage in development in the 1960s, developed by the Roach Brothers Mining Pty. So they recognised the potential here for quick wins, I suppose, through gravity separation, reprocessing of those historical dumps and some of the alluvial materials that were formed close to the deposit surface. So their first stage was to reinvigorate processing by developing a gravity separation plant. But one of the key things that actually turned around this operation was the identification of the amenability of this mineralisation style to a form of ore sorting that was becoming adopted from some of the South African mines, and this was optical ore sorting. So essentially accepting white rocks and rejecting black rocks. So the white rocks in this case were the quartz veins, which held the majority of the tungsten mineralisation, and the dark rocks were the host rock, the metaphilites, the host deposit. So kind of linking back in some respects to Katarina's talk, this is a very early way of accepting quartz-rich material and rejecting quartz-poor material as well. During this phase, the hard rock resource was estimated to be about 20 million tonnes, but the very, very low grades, about 0.9% tungsten oxide. This is about 700 ppm. But nevertheless, between this phase of operation, it produced about 1,400, nearly 15,000 tonnes of tungsten concentrate from about 10 million tonnes of crushed ore. So the current operations is currently owned by EQ Resources, that were formerly Speciality Metals. But significantly as well, kind of harking back to some of the original kind of work that brought people back to this site, there's a joint venture with Chronomet Group who are currently reprocessing the low-grade stockpile. This was the stockpile developed from those 1970s, 1980s operation, and also the historical tailings as well. One of the key pieces of technology now that we're using, or is being used, is the XRT ore sorter, X-ray transmission ore sorter. So this has been brought to the site, and this is used for reprocessing of the low-grade stockpile material. So looking at some of the resources of the low-grade stockpile, for example, you can see there's a low-grade stockpile up here of about 12 million tonnes. It is very low grade, but in combination with that XRT ore sorter, that's able to be upgraded quite significantly. The optical reject material from that original ore sorting process contains another 4 million tonnes, but again, very low grade, and quite a significant amount of grade in the tailings as well. I suppose a significant part of this operation is that there's still significant resource in the ground. At the time of closure in the 1980s, a decline was partially installed, and there's further exploration potential, and EQ Resources have had quite good recent success in their deep drilling underneath the Andy White open pit there, so there's a lot of exciting developments in the pipeline. In terms of the regional geology, I'm not going to dwell too much. I'm going to move fairly fast just because I know we're kind of cognizant of time. But this is taken directly from the atlas. You can see the location here of Mount Carbine within the Hodgkinson province. This is part of the Paleozoic Mosman origin, and you can see that it's been intruded quite significantly by the Permian and Carboniferous granites, which are broadly grouped into the Kennedy Igneous Association. There's quite a distinct northwest trend and fabric to the Hodgkinson province, and we'll see as we move towards the district geology as well how that's having quite a significant control on the mineralisation. So looking at the 1 to 1,000 or 1 to 100,000 geological map, again, we're kind of zooming in now on Mount Carbine, and we can see that it's sitting outside of this Permian granite, the Mount Carbine and the Spurgeon granite. This is a Spurgeon granite here. So it's not directly hosted by granite. You can see that the deposit is actually hosted within the Permian Hodgkinson formation, and this is dominantly composed of grey wackies and arenites with a kind of a lower grain sheet splash metamorphism. But again, we can see this pronounced northwest fabric through the geology, and we can look at the geophysics on the next map as well. The next nearest granite to Mount Carbine is the Mount Alto granite, located here towards the southwest, and again, Permian in age. So the magnetic map, again, taken from the atlas, as we like to sort of compile all of this, you can see that the granites generally have quite a low magnetic response, but the Hodgkinson formation itself is quite, has a very strong magnetic response. So you can see the Mount Carbine deposit located just through here. So the stream sediment geochemistry, apologies for the small scale on this. I didn't have the opportunity to make it much larger, but I'm just going to step through very briefly some of the regional geochemical indicators of the tungsten mineralization in the region. You can see the tungsten's just slightly elevated around Mount Carbine within the Hodgkinson formation, and then within the Hodgkinson formation further away from the granites, we're seeing much lower responses. Similarly, there's quite elevated tin in the district, and again, Paul will comment on the relationship between tin, tungsten in this region more broadly. But again, we're seeing the tin highly concentrated, as we're seeing probably drainage shredding from these higher grounds associated with the granites. Interestingly as well, we do see elevated arsenic, so you can see the arsenic kicking in around Mount Carbine and also around some of the granites as well, but generally quite low within the Hodgkinson formation. But the converse is true for stream sediment copper. So we're seeing probably a natural enrichment in the Hodgkinson formation, but significantly no significant sign of copper associated directly with the stream sediment geochemistry around these systems. So the early geological work was mainly carried out by Forsyth and Higgins, and this is an Australian ore deposits and the ore deposits of Australian Papua New Guinea volume, but also by a PhD thesis by Daru, who really focused on some of the structural relationships. The main feature of the mineralization that's been mapped at Mount Carbine is the fact that the main ore host and veins seem to be located within quite a prominent region of high strain. So you can see the outline here of the open pit abutting the South Wall Fault, which truncates mineralization. And then we have a northwest trending fault here called the Central Fault. Just located towards the northeast of the main open pit is a prospect at depth called Iron Duke, which is the subject of further drilling work from what I understand. But you can see just from this early map some of the trends of some of the main northwest trending vein zones. And as they move off towards the northwest, you can see they start changing slightly in strike. But these are other prospects within the district. So you can see that there's quite a lot of prospectivity more regionally within the region. There are a few dikes that cross-cut. There's no granites as such, or dominant granites intruded within the sequence, but there are a few dikes, including tonalites and pegmatites, that cross-cut the high strain zone and the mineralized veins in places. So we can get a temporal relationship between the mineralization phase and some of these granites or these late-stage igneous intrusions. Sorry, I just want to highlight this northeast-southwest cross-section I'm going to show on the next slide. So this is some of the early work. It's really just to highlight the vertical extent of some of the veins. So the vein system is characteristically sheeted. So the principal vein orientation is towards the northwest. You can see that the veins typically range from about 1 to 200 centimeters in width. So anywhere from very, very minor narrow veins to much larger, almost composite veins. But the grade within these veins is very heterogeneous. So you can see grades ranging from 0.12 up to 2.8% tungsten. So we're seeing a very nuggety distribution of grade. So this could obviously make ore estimation quite problematic in these sorts of systems. The mapping of the surface, which I showed on the previous slide, and some further work that's been done recently in the district, shows that the veins can extend laterally for more than 500 to 1,000 meters. And this region now, at depth, is now the subject of current exploration work that's being carried out by EQ Resources. DeVere identified that there was quite a strong structural control on the emplacement of the veins. So these tend to be subparallel to a regional deformation event. So this is parallel to the regional D2 deformation axial planes, which have been developed in the Hodgkinson Formation. So there's kind of almost a preconditioning to these veins being in place. And as I mentioned before, obviously the extensions to depth being carried out by EQ Resources. So just kind of a pit perspective of these veins. You can see in the Mount Carbine open pit, this was one of the earlier the shots from 1986 from one of Andy White's publications. And you can see these vertically extensive, pretty thick quartz veins, and then separated by large volumes of largely barren metasedimentary rocks. In terms of the mineralization style, you can see the nature of these dark metasedimentary rocks. They're dominantly metaarenites or metaphilites, and you can see how the veins punctuate through here. So they're fairly sporadic, but they can reach quite significant thicknesses, as I mentioned, somewhere between 1 and up to 2 meters in places. Some of the intrusions that can be picked out in these core images, you can see material here that's been logged as almost like a rhyolite porphyry, and then a tonalite porphyry as well. But the relationship to the mineralization at the moment hasn't been directly linked at the moment. But you can see again some of the early veins as well. Some paragenetic work that was carried out at James Cook quite recently also talks about some of the early pre-mineralization veins. So obviously it's a metasedimentary package with a kind of a protracted deformation history. So there's a series of quartz veins that form these deformed and curvy and discontinuous nature that don't carry any significant tungsten mineralization. But then second two stages of main stage quartz mineralization, and then a later stage of mainly quartz sulfide mineralization and minor tin mineralization as well. There's a late stage overprint of quartz, calcite and fluorite as well, so fairly typical of these granite-related systems. In terms of the mineralization, some of these veins are actually the early pre-mineralization veins, so you can see that they have this kind of discontinuous nature. You can see they're following deformation fabrics and they're folded. They actually don't contain any significant mineralization. But where the mineralization does occur, it principally occurs as wolframite and scheelite. So we can see the wolframite here as these large dark lebs within dominantly quartz-rich veins. So we don't really see mineralization extending far beyond the veins, but there's a complex interplay between wolframite and shearite as well. So some of the original work has documented an approximate ratio of about 7:1 of wolframite to shearite within the main pit. But as you move towards the northeast, potentially towards the Iron Duke prospect, there's an increase in the shearite ratio as well. So there's something changing within either the deposition or control or the overall mineral balance there. There is a complex shearite association. So in the hand specimen, it's very easy to pick the shearite using a shortwave infrared lamp. So you can see the fluorescence here in the blue. But in thin section, very complex shearite alteration replacement textures have been seen, and different alteration phases as well. So there seems to be that there's an early high temperature phase, which is dominated by tourmaline, biotite, cave files, albite. This is kind of reflecting a slightly higher temperature, high boron flux part of the system. But then this kind of later overprint dominated by chlorite, and then sulfides and the fluorite stage as well. So just some of the kind of additional work that's been done recently. This is just an example of a piece of core from the drilling within the open pit. You can see the fluorescent here is picking out the shearite and some of the dark areas, which are quite clearly the wolframite mineralization. There's two parallel veins; they almost look identical, and just kind of to highlight, well, how do we estimate vein mineral abundance when we can't necessarily see all throughout that whole vein? Are there different generations, or how do we kind of reconcile this? So we've done a little bit of XRF element mapping, and we can see the distribution of tungsten, calcium, sulfur, and copper. Perhaps something that isn't always appreciated is distribution of some of these minor minerals, minor metals within the deposit. But we also managed to use some other core scanning technologies as well. So this is a 3D tomographic image of those two veins, and we can see quite clearly this isn't just a surface effect of grade distribution within these veins. This is the projection of that particular vein, the barren vein at the top here, and we can see there's actually no tungsten in there. So we see this as quite a useful tool for mapping out the distribution of tungsten phases really effectively. The nice link here is that the same technology that's used in the characterization of this is actually the identical to the sensor that's in the ore sorter as well. So we can see that paired relationship between how we characterize the distribution of these minerals and how we actually apply that at the ore sorting stage as well. I'm just going to talk very briefly about the genetic model. The exploration model that's typically used on site is based on tungsten deposits from China and Asia. And we kind of see in this vertical transition, it's been inferred that we're seeing different levels within a kind of a protracted or an extended, vertically protracted hydrothermal system, clearly related to granites within the region, but obviously we're not at the level here where we actually intercept the granites. So we're kind of located somewhere between here and in some places within the district, shallow levels. At the moment, we don't know too much about the alteration, mineralization, zonation with depth, but this could be a really good opportunity for us to explore the application of further technologies, including things like the high logger, where we can actually map some of those temperature-dependent alteration minerals, including things like tourmaline, chlorite, and muscovite as well, and look at that transition. And this could be particularly important when exploring regionally within the district, because actually this is going to give us an indication of different exposure levels of potential systems. So there's quite a few opportunities still to be won here at Mount Carbine. I think we have the context of Pollard's work looking at these systems quite closely, but there are other opportunities for other new minerals as well. There's been only a very small amount of work to look at the substitution of rare earth elements into shearite, which is a particular phase that is quite conducive to substitution for rare earth elements. So I think that there's more prospects on the horizon as well for Mount Carbine. I haven't got a huge amount of time. I'm going to dwell, or I'm not going to go into the geoscience analyst package, but I do encourage you to download the package. So I'll reference you back to the SMI homepage, where you can download the entire data set. And this is just a quick example, a quick screen grab of some of those wireframes that have been built and kindly made available by EQ Resources and Coronet, just to show the distribution of those veins that have been modeled. But there's a whole suite of other data that's packaged up in here that talks about or shows the distribution of geological features at Mount Carbine as well. So I do think this is a quick run through on this atlas. I do obviously the atlas is available online for you to download. But just to summarise very quickly, that we're looking at here a sheeted quartz vein hosted tungsten deposit. It fits very nicely within the spectrum of tungsten deposits within northeast Queensland, which Paul's going to talk about a little bit later on. It's hosted by the Permian-Hodgkinson Formation, so we're not looking at a granite-hosted horizon system. We're looking obviously at this metasedimentary host rock sequence, and that's kind of given rise to this really distinctive quartz vein hosted system. We do obviously see this temporal association with highly fractionated Permian granites, which is obviously a major control of the formation of this system. It's really good to see that we've got wolframite and scheelite mineralogy, which is amenable to ore sorting and pre-concentration. Deposits like this, which have very low head grades, the economics can potentially prevent them from coming into full-scale operations. So looking at the application of these technologies is going to be really critical to transformation of these resources, not just in-ground resources, but as Chronomet and EQ resources are showing, transformation of waste streams that are actually available and ready to be mined on the site. And again, just to highlight, there's clearly very high resource potential in Mount Carbine, and more regionally by looking at these systems as a full system approach. Just before I do go, I just wanted to thank, of course, EQ Resources, so Kevin McNeil, Tony Bainbridge, and Ryan McNeil, and Chronomet, Damien Lefevre, and Oliver Klein-Hempel. They've been really supportive of the work that we've been doing, and we've been working together on a Mets Ignited program as well, so that's coming to an end. Thanks also to Helen and Courtney at the Department of Resources, and here at UQ, Anita, Paul, Jenna, and Rick Valenta as well, and some to Lachlan Casey at the UQ Centre for Microscopy and Microanalysis, who helped us with some of the analysis as well. So that's me. If there are any questions, please.
Thanks, Nathan. Well, I think as with the previous deposit atlases, that's still, it's pretty good pulling it all up there, and really pleased to see all that work coming together. It's really fantastic. So thanks for all that effort, and thanks for sticking in this afternoon. I know you've got some other important jobs to do as well.
I just realised I actually did go through that very quickly, so hopefully we can get back to time, because I know that we're.
No, it's all good. If anybody has questions for Nathan about Mount Carbine, then please fire them in the Q&A. Otherwise, I do have one. So you mentioned, the regional potential. Yes. Based on all that modelling. So do you want to talk me through that a little bit?
Well, I've been reading Paul's Tin Tungsten Review chapter, and I think that certainly Paul might be the one to talk about the regional prospectivity, but certainly when you look towards the north, towards Watershed, and then south towards Walker Camp, there certainly seems to be historical opportunities. So obviously they're historical mines with surface waste, and again, maybe it's following the same model. Easy opportunities to move in there, look at the opportunities to reprocess some of that waste, and then as Mount Carbine has set the really kind of the example, then undertake a re-evaluation of the hard rock resources in these regions. But no, certainly I think Paul's got a lot to add on kind of the fractionated granite story and the distribution of those regions in the northeast Queensland. I think it's a great opportunity to kind of look at these deposits in a more kind of ore systems approach, and I think that's something that, as Rick touched on with the rare earth elements, that's kind of the thinking that we need to be having to look at other areas of potential.
No, definitely, and good segue into Paul's next presentation. And I know EQ have had some really great success in their recent drilling and defining more resources around Mount Carbine, I believe is what's been happening there. So looking forward to, they've reprocessed, or they are in the process of going through the mine waste, and then there's still a lot of potential in that area for new in-ground resources as well to build on that.
No, it's looking really good, and the geology is really exciting as well. So I think it'd be good to be able to, as I say, apply some of these new tools to actually characterise the deposit in a kind of a more modern way. Because I think unfortunately it's kind of falls into that age period where it didn't get much attention, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I think the work that you've pulled together will be really helpful in that and helping other explorers in that area. So thanks again.